Today we have the chance to essentially look at the intersection of entrepreneurship, financial technology, and education all in one in this panel. We have amazing speakers that will all get to introduce themselves shortly now. But maybe what I wanted to first off and kick off was everyone introduce yourself. So Laurence, David, Bowie, please, when you introduce yourself to the following question, tell who you are, but if you were to take a step back and you were to think when you went to university, and you don't have to tell us when you went to university, how has this changed? How has entrepreneurship changed? So if you look back at the class where you were, how many students do you think wanted to do their own company, and how many could actually be helped by the university? And if you would go to Hong Kong U today, for example, how much would that change?
I am Bowie. I'm based in Hong Kong. I'm a woman with many faces. One side, I do angel investment into technology companies in the areas of AI, big data, blockchain, cybersecurity, and Internet of Things. I also invested in a venture capital fund called True Global Ventures, focusing on emerging technologies. So beside that, I run a consultancy arm helping companies in terms of business development, market access, and connecting them to the right people. And I'm very active in the tech and fintech space. I conducted lots of events in tech, fintech, family offices, and investment-related events. So if you ask me if I took a step back, I think 99% wouldn't do a startup back then. And now time has changed, right? And now I think if I get to study at HKU, and I do expect minimum of 1/3 of students now would want to do a startup or interested in joining a startup. Now, Hong Kong U or any other university have lots of accelerators, incubators, and other programs to encourage and support tech startups. So I think it's very encouraging and promising.
Hi everyone, I'm Laurence Tang from Hong Kong U iDendron, which is a university innovation entrepreneurship hub. And in fact, I graduated from the University of Hong Kong as well, like 5 years ago. So back then, when I was still studying my bachelor in the university, by that time, I would say that there are not much coordinated effort on startups, on grooming startups, or doing entrepreneurship education in the university. We have separate courses, but definitely we didn't have any incubator or startup mentorship or a community of people who are interested in starting their own business or tech startup, etc. And right now, after a few years, and the management of the university decided that that we should do more on that part, and we started our own funding scheme, funding competitions, and we have an entrepreneurship academy. It's on-campus classes. Every week, we have over 300 people joining us to learn some entrepreneurship 101 knowledge, and then they will start to think what they can do on the startup or entrepreneurship journey. And right now, we also have the iDendron. It's an on-campus workspace, and all the Hong Kong U startup projects, they can apply for this space and work together. We have a very dynamic community, over 300 members working together. And I would say that right now, the University of Hong Kong has a pretty much strong community and also culture to start their own business. And I want to add one more point is that, like, apart from being a founder, we also observe that more and more students are really willing to work in the startups to learn more hands-on experiences before they are like starting their own business. Because to be honest, not everyone is suitable to be a founder, and they might not be able to fit in the founder's lifestyle as well, because it's pretty tough and risk-taking. But I see right now, apart from working in big corps and working in startups as an intern or graduate jobs is also a trend in the university community as well.
quick background myself. I teach at the University of Hong Kong at the business school. Prior to coming to the academy, I'm a lawyer by training, but worked in investment banks for many years, helped launch 2 investment firms, worked with a number of startups, advise, kind of a principal on a large Southeast Asia venture firm at the moment. And so, kind of my thinking about this comes from my own professional experience, but as well as looking at students. And so, like, for example, Terence, who was just presenting in the previous session on his startup, was a former student in one of our FinTech classes. And so I guess I look at it from 2 perspectives, and just, related to the question about, what's the incentive for universities to do this? I think certainly there's a commercial incentive. A large part of the kind of the well-known ecosystems that we see in places like in the US, so like in Silicon Valley or in Boston, or increasingly in Los Angeles and other places, a large part of that ecosystem is driven by technology that's developed at universities, and then through technology transfer processes are then commercialized. And so I think that that process was very well developed in the last few decades in a large for large U.S. research universities in the U.S. And the universities that have done that well have been able to develop an ecosystem around their universities. And then there becomes a synergy of research coming out of university, commercialization into new companies that absorb students, and then the cycle continues. And then the companies grow and they become larger. Then entrepreneurs then spin out of those companies, and then again the cycle keeps going. So I think that's where the structural incentive is. Maybe I'll just add one thing before I hand over to Musheer. I think I've been teaching at the university for almost 5.5 years, and I would certainly say the interest in entrepreneurship amongst my students has increased. I think when I first came, less than 5 or 10% would be interested. But certainly now, and maybe because it's the economic kind of situation with job hunting being very difficult, but certainly I have a lot more students who are either doing things separately, participating in iDendron, cyberport schemes, etc. And it's good to see, because regularly I have students come in to my office, I guess now virtually, and chatting about their ideas, which wasn't happening as much when I first got here.
A brief background: I run an advisory firm, which is FinStep Asia. We provide advisory to startups to scale in Asia. We also work with corporates on their startup engagement, in addition to doing research on FinTech. I am a product of HKU MBA. David's been a mentor for me, and I've worked with a bunch of you there. And interestingly enough, I'm also a product of what's known as a business lab in the HKU MBA program, which Mr. Pedro Eloy runs. Now, that was a structured program that teaches you about building a product or a startup from scratch, from ideation. How do you go about, all the way to pitching to VCs and investors, which he brings in real investors. And I had built an idea on 3D printing. And what I've seen since I did that course in 2014, about 6 years before, is as David's mentioned, there's a lot more structured program. The Standard Chartered HKU collaboration is a classic example. You have a bunch of others in other universities in Hong Kong as well, which are focused on FinTech. Secondly, FinTech isn't just now an add-on subject. You have full courses. I think that's a very important element, largely focused around data sciences and understanding of how financial technology is evolving. But I think that's a good progress from where we were 6 years ago, where people were just trying to figure out what the term means, and technology was meant just for engineering students and computer science students, right? However, I hear your point on deep tech and developing of IP, etc., when it comes to universities and that transfer thereof in Hong Kong. I feel as good as some of the places like Science Park have been in helping develop deep tech, we've also had some smart people like SenseTime coming out of Hong Kong universities. You haven't really necessarily seen a large jump in the number of deep tech startups that are coming through as a result of technology transfers, at least in the FinTech space. I think in biotech, maybe in health tech, where there are some very interesting research going on in Hong Kong. You've seen some startups there. But in FinTech, I think you need 3 elements, right? One, you need to have the willingness of the university to invest in technology purely from a research perspective. Number two, you need students to be interested, which, as David has said, that numbers increased. There's a KPMG report that came out last year, earlier this year, which talks about entrepreneurship and the culture thereof in Hong Kong. About 85% to 90% of students are willing to take risk and get into startups, right? They're more than happy even if they feel it will fail. That's increased from about 70% a couple of years ago. Now it has moved, and on the other side, families, when they asked, would they approve of you, that percentage was around 15%, has gone up to 25%. So we do see this big gap between where the families accept the risk of their children getting into startups and where the young people want to get into startups, right? And that's changing, evolving, but not significantly. So secondly is the interest of students and technology students to get into more research-based work around fintech. And number three will be the ability of corporates, not just to fund like the academies, but also to take on these programs as part of their POCs, right? To bring that as a, the three-part partnership, I think is going to be very critical if we do want to go somewhere. I think we're still in very early stages when it comes to Hong Kong's fintech IP transfer